The barber said, "Lean back," and smiled. Chair lowered. His fingers lingered on my neck. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I stepped into Mario's barbershop on Maple Street. The place had that distinct scent that all good barbershops seem to have, a blend of talcum powder, aftershave, and something vaguely medicinal that somehow comes together to create a comforting aroma. The wooden floors creaked slightly beneath my feet, telling stories of the thousands who had walked this same path before me. Vintage photographs lined the walls, men with perfectly coiffed hair from decades past, smiling confidently into the camera. The sound of scissors snipping and casual conversation filled the air, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter. A small bell had announced my arrival, causing several heads to turn momentarily before returning to their previous positions. Mario himself was working at the third chair from the door. He was a man in his early 40s with salt and pepper hair that was, unsurprisingly, impeccably styled. His sleeves were rolled up to reveal forearms covered in intricate tattoos, a surprising contrast to his otherwise traditional appearance. When our eyes met in the mirror, he smiled warmly and gestured toward the empty waiting area. "Be with you in about 5 minutes," he said, his voice carrying a hint of an accent I couldn't quite place. I nodded and took a seat, picking up a dog-eared sports magazine that was probably several months out of date. There's something uniquely vulnerable about getting a haircut, isn't there? We rarely let strangers touch our heads. Yet here we are, regularly surrendering ourselves to someone wielding sharp objects near our ears and neck. It's an intimate experience disguised as a mundane errand. I'd been coming to Mario for nearly 2 years now, ever since moving to this neighborhood, but there was still that moment of anticipation each time, wondering how I'd look afterward, whether I'd leave feeling refreshed or slightly disappointed. Today, I particularly needed this haircut. I had a job interview the following week, a position I'd been eyeing for months. First impressions matter, and I wanted to look my best. Beyond that, there was something about the ritual of a haircut that felt like pressing a reset button on life. New hair, new possibilities. I needed that psychological boost perhaps even more than the physical transformation. Next, Mario called, and I realized I was the only one waiting. I set down the magazine and made my way to his chair, exchanging the usual pleasantries about weather and weekend plans. The black cape was fastened around my neck, slightly too tight at first until Mario adjusted it with practiced hands. "The usual?" he asked, and I nodded, settling into the familiar routine. "Lean back," he said with a smile, his hand already on the hydraulic lever. The chair reclined smoothly, and I felt my body relax into its contours. There's something almost therapeutic about that moment, the surrender to gravity, the shift in perspective as the ceiling comes into view. Mario's fingers found their way to my neck, adjusting my position slightly before guiding my head toward the wash basin. His touch lingered there just a moment longer than strictly necessary, or perhaps that was just my imagination. There was a gentleness to his hands that seemed at odds with their strength, hands that could probably crush walnuts but were delicately positioning my head with the precision of a sculptor. The water temperature was perfect, warm enough to relax, but not so hot as to be uncomfortable. Mario's fingertips began working shampoo into my scalp, and I felt the day's tensions begin to dissolve. There's an undeniable intimacy to having someone wash your hair, the physical closeness, the trust implicit in the act. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to enjoy the sensation without overthinking it. The pressure of his fingers against my scalp created small circles of pleasure that radiated outward, and I found myself sinking deeper into relaxation. "You're carrying a lot of tension here," Mario observed, his thumbs pressing into a particularly tight spot at the base of my skull. "Work stress." I murmured an affirmative response, surprised by his perception. "The body remembers what the mind tries to forget," he said philosophically, and I wondered about his life before becoming a barber. There was a wisdom to him that suggested experiences beyond the four walls of this shop. As he rinsed the shampoo from my hair, I noticed the subtle scent of rosemary and mint. It was invigorating, clearing my senses as effectively as it cleaned my hair. Water cascaded around my ears, creating a momentary cocoon of sound that isolated us from the rest of the shop. In that brief bubble of privacy, I became acutely aware of the trust one was placing in this man, my neck exposed, eyes closed, completely vulnerable. It's strange how we normalize these moments of intimacy with virtual strangers, isn't it? The chair raised back to its upright position, and I blinked, adjusting to the shift in perspective. Mario stood behind me, our eyes meeting in the mirror as he combed through my wet hair. There was something in his gaze, a focused intensity that made me feel simultaneously seen and unseen. To him, I was both a person and a canvas. "How's the family?" I asked, partly out of genuine interest and partly to break the strange spell of the moment. He smiled, and the mood lightened. "My daughter just started college, pre-med. Can you believe it?" Pride radiated from him as he began the first cuts, scissors moving with hypnotic precision. Tiny clippings of hair began to accumulate on the cape, marking the transformation in progress. As Mario shared stories about his daughter's academic achievements, I found myself studying his face in the mirror, the laugh lines around his eyes, the focused set of his mouth as he concentrated on a particularly precise cut. The rhythm of the scissors became almost meditative. Snip, comb, snip, comb. There's something deeply satisfying about watching a skilled person practice their craft, regardless of what that craft might be. Mario had been cutting hair for over 20 years, and it showed in every confident movement. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just the fluid motion of someone who has transformed a skill into an art through thousands of repetitions. "Lean forward a bit," he directed, his hand gently pressing against the back of my head. I complied, chin tucking toward my chest as he attended to the nape of my neck. The buzz of the trimmer sent a slight shiver down my spine. That peculiar sensation that's neither ticklish nor unpleasant, but somehow both. His fingers brushed against my skin, steadying my head, and I was struck by how different this touch felt from the earlier one. Same hands, same person, but a completely different quality to the contact. My mind wandered to other haircuts, other barbers. There was Mr. Giannopoulos from my childhood, an elderly Greek man who smelled of cigarettes and told the same 3 jokes to every customer. I remembered my college years, when budget constraints meant entrusting my hair to whoever was offering the cheapest cut that week. And then there was the period after my divorce, when I'd impulsively shaved my head completely, a physical manifestation of my desire to strip everything back and start again. Each haircut is a small marker in the timeline of our lives, isn't it? Not just in how we look in photos from different eras, but in what was happening around those moments. I remembered getting my hair cut the day before my wedding, the barber joking about last chances to run. There was the haircut after my father's funeral, where I sat in numb silence, barely registering the snip of scissors. And the one before my first date after the divorce, when I'd tipped extravagantly out of nervous gratitude. "So, this interview," Mario said, interrupting my thoughts. "What's the position?" I was surprised he remembered. I'd mentioned it only in passing during our brief initial exchange. As I explained the role and why I wanted it, Mario listened attentively, occasionally offering insights that were surprisingly perceptive. "You should mention your experience with the Thompson project," he suggested, referencing something I'd told him months ago. "That shows exactly the kind of initiative they're looking for." There's something uniquely freeing about talking to someone like Mario, someone connected enough to care, but detached enough to offer unbiased perspective. Like bartenders and taxi drivers, barbers occupy this interesting space in our social landscape. Temporary confidants who see us regularly enough to know us, but not so deeply that their judgment carries the weight of close friends or family. I found myself sharing concerns about the interview that I hadn't voiced even to my closest friends, and Mario's responses were thoughtful without being overly invested. "Now for the sides," he said, reaching for the clippers. "Number 3, right?" I nodded, impressed by his memory for such details. As the clippers hummed against my temple, Mario continued our conversation, sharing a story about his own career change decades earlier. "I was in finance before this, if you can believe it," he revealed. "Wore a suit every day, had the corner office, the whole package." The clippers paused as he switched angles. "But I was miserable. Absolutely miserable." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "What made you switch to barbering?" The question seemed to please him, as though he enjoyed having the opportunity to tell this particular story. As the clippers resumed their work, he explained how he'd always cut hair for friends in college, how it had been a way to make extra money. "But it was more than that," he said, his voice taking on a reflective quality. "When I cut someone's hair, I could see the result of my work immediately. I could see how it made them feel better, more confident. In finance, Everything was abstract, numbers on a screen, projections, forecasts. Nothing tangible. His story resonated with me more than I expected. I'd been feeling increasingly disconnected from my own work lately, wondering if the reports I generated and the meetings I attended actually mattered to anyone. There was something appealing about Mario's choice, the directness of it, the immediate impact. Wasn't it scary? I asked. Leaving a secure career for something so different? Terrifying, he admitted with a laugh. My parents thought I'd lost my mind. My ex-wife too, actually, though that wasn't the reason for the ex part. He stepped back, examining his work from a different angle before continuing. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes the scariest decisions lead to the most authentic life. I'm not rich, but I'm happy. I connect with people all day. I create something with my hands. Not everyone can say that about their work. The conversation shifted something in me, not a dramatic epiphany, but a subtle shift in perspective. I'd been approaching this upcoming interview with desperation, seeing it as my only path forward. But listening to Mario, I began to wonder if I was asking the right questions about my own career. Was I pursuing this new position because it aligned with what truly mattered to me, or simply because it was the next logical rung on a ladder I'd been climbing without questioning? Almost done, Mario said, reaching for a spray bottle. He misted my hair lightly before combing it into place, his movements precise and deliberate. Let me show you the back. He held up a mirror behind my head, allowing me to see his handiwork from all angles. The cut was perfect, exactly what I'd asked for, yet somehow better than I'd envisioned. There's an art to giving people what they want while also giving them what suits them best, and Mario had mastered it. What do you think? He asked, though his confident smile suggested he already knew the answer. It's perfect, I confirmed, genuinely impressed. He nodded, satisfied, and removed the cape with a flourish, sending the tiny hair clippings scattering to the floor. As I stood, he placed a hand on my shoulder, another of those casual touches that somehow carried more weight than its brevity would suggest. About that interview, he said, just remember, they're not just evaluating you. You're evaluating them too. Don't forget to ask yourself if they deserve your talent. I paid and added a generous tip, thanking him not just for the haircut, but for the conversation. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Same time next month? I nodded, already looking forward to it. Stepping out onto the sidewalk, I caught my reflection in the shop window, not just the fresh haircut, but something different in my posture, my expression, something more assured. It's funny how these ordinary moments sometimes become extraordinary, isn't it? A routine haircut had somehow become a moment of connection and reflection. Mario's fingers lingering on my neck, the vulnerability of leaning back in his chair, the unexpected depth of our conversation. All of it combined into an experience that felt significant beyond the simple transaction it appeared to be. What is it about these brief human connections that can affect us so deeply? Perhaps it's the reminder that beneath our professional veneers and social performances, we're all just seeking authentic moments of understanding. Or maybe it's simpler than that. The fundamental human need for touch, for attention, for someone to literally and figuratively see us, even if just for 30 minutes in a barber's chair. As I walked home, I found myself thinking about Mario's journey from finance to barbering, and how courage often lies in questioning the paths we've unthinkingly accepted. I thought about the interview ahead and realized I had new questions to ask, not just how I could impress them, but whether the role would bring me closer to or further from the kind of authentic connection Mario had found in his work. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the street. I ran my hand through my freshly cut hair, feeling somehow both lighter and more grounded. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities, but for now, I carried with me the unexpected gift of that barbershop moment, the simple human connection that had somehow transcended the ordinary. And isn't that, after all, what we're all searching for? Those moments when routine transactions become meaningful exchanges, when strangers become momentary confidants, when we're reminded that beneath the roles we play lies our shared humanity. Perhaps that's why we return to the same barbers, the same cafes, the same small rituals that punctuate our days, not just for the services they provide, but for the brief connections they foster in an increasingly disconnected world. As I reached my apartment building, I paused to look at my reflection one more time in the glass door. The haircut really was perfect. But more than that, I looked ready, not just for an interview, but for whatever might come next. Sometimes, it seems, all we need is to lean back, trust another person for a moment, and allow ourselves to be transformed, not just on the outside, but in those subtle internal ways that matter most. Total _char_count, 13,947.